everybody, this is Christine. Welcome to Scrap and Rabbit. I finished another journal and I wanted to show you how I did this one. It's similar to the other journals that I've been making, except my stitching is on the outside of the spine, and I also added some beading on here. And in addition, instead of using a hardcover book, I made my own covers using some upholstery fabric and a little bit of velour. It's a velour type fabric, and just some cardstock that I had from leftover paper pads. I always cut off the backings and the covers, and I keep them because these are very useful for crafting. So I've got quite a bit of this stuff that I keep, and I use that to make this cover because I wanted a bit of flexibility in there, and it gives it a really nice texture with the fabric. So I will take you through the album quickly, and then I'm going to do a quick tutorial that shows how I put this together. So again, I've got some seam binding. Now this one, instead of attaching the closure to the back cover, I attached it to the side in between the stitching for the inside pages. And then I covered the seam binding with a little button. So that just ties into a bow. And then on the inside, I've got a little bit of lace around the edge. On the outside, I just put a little bit of trim on the edge here. And then to cover up the cut ends on the inside, I put a little bit of this lace. And then this is just lace type seam binding as well that I put all along the edge on the inside. Inside my covers, I've got the same type of fabric that I have on the spine. And I like this because it's a very neutral color and the beads show up really nicely on there. So these are the pages that I made. Again, it's similar to my other albums, the beading and the coffee stained pages. And I've got little charms attached inside. Here's a pocket. And I will be putting this album up in my Etsy shop if anybody's interested in purchasing it. But I wanted to do this tutorial first on how I assembled it. Here's the inside pockets. And I had some sheet music that I used, and I just inked around the edges. So again, the focus on this journal is on journaling, so there are no embellishments inside. I had this type of paper laying around, so I included that inside. So my inside pages are constructed the same as my other journals, except I've got my pockets that are a little bit different, and I've got the fabric tabs. Now for attaching the pages, it's basically the same thing as in my other album, only instead of attaching the pages to a fabric and then attaching the fabric inside the journal, I'm attaching the pages directly to the spine of the journal. So I'll show you a screenshot of what the pages looked like when they were stitched to the fabric. So I'll show you how to make the covers. I started with this piece of cardstock that I cut from one of my pads. It measures 12 inches across, and I wanted my covers to be 5 inches on each side, and that leaves me with a 2-inch spine. That gives me enough room for 4 signatures in my pages. So I'm going to make another album like this one, only I'm going to use some different fabric. So just like my other journal, I'm going to use this fabric for the inside and for my spine. And then I've got this piece of fabric that I cut. It's also upholstery fabric, and I'm going to use that for the outside of the album, of the journal. So I've cut my cardstock, and I've scored 5 inches from each side, and here's the skeleton for my covers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this down like that over my fabric, and I'm going to glue around the outside edges and on each side of the folds of my spine. And I'm going to use my hot glue gun to do this. So put your fabric so that it's face down, and then put your covers face down like that so that the inside is down, and line that up. Now it's okay if it's not perfectly straight, because I'm going to cut around after. But the important thing is leave a little edge on the left and on the right, because I'm going to glue this bottom fabric to the top layer once it's attached. So I'll start with this edge, and I'm just going to put some glue on here. So I'm going to cut the top and the bottom even after. So I'll just move this around. I'm going to try and stay in frame. So now I'm going to glue down these edges and on both sides of the spine. And I'm going to let this cool a little bit. Then I'm going to continue around the edges. And along both sides of the fold on the other side of the spine. And then the remaining edges. I'm not very good at gluing straight, but luckily the edges will be covered by the other fabric anyways. Okay, so now I can trim off the excess fabric. I'm going to leave my length here, and I'm also going to leave about 1/2 inch on this side, but I'm going to cut these edges here straight up against my cardstock. It's probably more like 1 inch, but it's okay. And then I cut down the other length flush with the cardstock. So this will be the inside of my journal. And that would fold in like that. Now this might be a little bit bubbly here. Don't worry about that, because when you attach your pages you won't even see this section, or you won't see most of it anyways. Next I trim my outside fabric. And when I cut it so that I'm going to have, again, at least 1/2 inch to 1 inch on each side. And it's also going to be about 1 inch wider at the top and bottom. So I can trim a little bit of this off. Now when I'm done, I'm going to wrap the top and the bottom edges to the inside of the journal, like that. So you'll have clean edges along the top and bottom. Then these edges here will be glued, and that's where I'm going to cover them with a little bit of lace and some trim like I did on this journal. But now I want to make my spine out of this fabric that will attach to the middle of my outside fabric. Now there are a couple of ways that you can do the cover. I think I'm going to have my fabric like that. I have a spine here that's in a different fabric, and you can either attach it directly over the cover fabric like that, and then just stitch or glue down the sides, and then you can always embellish the edges so that they won't be visible. But what I did for this one is I actually cut my covers in 2 pieces, and I stitched these to the edge of the spine, and that's what I'm going to do for this one. So I'm going to start by cutting my spine piece. My cover, the spine, measures 2 inches, and I want to leave a little bit of fabric so that it will go about 1 inch or 3/4 inches on each side of the covers. It'll overlap. And then because I'm going to be stitching this, I'm going to give myself another inch so that I have about a seam allowance of 1/2 inch on each side. So that's 2 inches, and then say 1.5 inches. I'll say another 2 inches for the overlap, so that's 4, and then another inch for the seam allowance, so that's 5 inches. I cut my spine fabric so that it measures about 5 inches wide, and then it's the same height as my cover fabric, which is 9.5 inches in this instance. It's about just a little bit over 9.5 inches. So I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to fold this in 2, and I'm going to trim this right down the middle. because that's where I'm going to attach my spine. So in the end, I'm going to take off about 2 inches from each side, but if you like, you can leave it all as one piece and just attach this to the top. So now I'm going to take my spine and I'm going to stitch it with both sides, good sides facing each other. I'm going to stitch the spine here, and then this will flip over and it will I'll stitch it over to this side like that, and then I'm going to zigzag along the edge. So I finished stitching my outside cover, and this is what it's going to look like. So I zigzag stitched, like first I just stitched each side, and then I put a zigzag stitch on top here, and I used some pink thread that I happen to have in my machine from my last project, and I like the look of the pink thread on there, so I just left it there. So now I can cut it to size so that it will fit my outside cover. And I think it'll be easier if I flip this over and just to cut this, I'm going to flip my cover over so that I can see where my seams are, and I'm going to center those over my spine. Like that. Yeah, so it's just over an inch on each side. That's pretty good. Like that. Now I'm not going to trim the top or the bottom because those are going to wrap inside the cover, but I'm going to trim the ends off. So I'm still going to have, for now, about ½ an inch sticking on each side. And it doesn't have to be perfect because I'll be trimming that again. Okay. So I'm going to place my outside cover over the outside of my cardboard. So that's going to be the front. And I'm going to fold the top and bottom edges in like that. And I'm going to use, sorry, I was probably off frame there. I'm going to fold the top edges like that, and I'm going to use my glue gun to do that. So I'll just start with a little bead of glue on the outside edge at the top. I didn't want to try stitching it because I don't know how well my sewing needle will go through the cardstock. Probably not all that well. So I'd rather just glue it. I'm going to do the same thing along the bottom edge. I'm going to fold that in like that. Like that. So there's my outside cover attached to the journal. I like how that looks. I really love this gold colored fabric. It probably goes pretty well with just about anything, and the beads will show up nicely on the side. Now for these edges, I'm going to cut both sides, but before I do that, I'm going to put some glue inside here. I can see my cardboard, so I'm going to glue as close as possible next to the cardboard, just on the outside, and then I'm going to cut it afterwards. So I'm going to start with this edge. So I'm just going to lift that up and put some glue in there. Lay this down, and I do the same thing on the other side while that cools. And now I can trim off the excess fabric. Make sure you don't cut through the cardstock. So I'm going to trim that. You can feel where the cardstock is. Or just fold the fabric a little bit. So that's pretty good. And then I do the same thing on the other side. The edge is going to be a little bit ragged. Some of this might come off, but when you get to the glue, then it's going to stop fraying. And some people like the frayed look. You can always trim off some of the edges. That's good. Now in my other journal, I added the inside trim after I put my pages in. For this one, I'm going to do my trim now because it's a lot easier to do this before adding my pages. So I'm going to put this trim along the inside. And I can also trim a little bit of the excess here if I need to. So that's going to go like that, just to cover the cut edge. trying to put my glue over the flower area on this trim, otherwise it's going to go right through, but it's clear so it won't be visible anyways. I just don't want to have too much glue oozing out the top. There we go. I'm going to trim that. I'm going to do the top section the same way. So I'm going to attach the trim to the outside of my journal after I put my pages in, but I think I'm just going to finish the inside before I attach my pages. So I'm going to use this trim, and I want to attach it so that it just covers, it's going to cover this cut edge. So that's going to go like that, and I'll just have a little bit of the border showing on the other side like that. And I don't want it sticking out too much either, because I'm going to have my ribbon closure here that's going to be going over it anyways. Next, I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So the inside of my cover is done, and that's what the outside looks like. And then I will add my trim after I finish putting my pages on. You can also add some trim here, but because I zigzag stitched, I'm not going to cover that. I'll just leave it as it is. So next I can start adding my pages, but before I do that, I have to go and coffee stain some paper that I can include in my journal. I've prepared my 4 signatures, and the outside cover of each signature measures 9 3/4 inches across by 7.5 inches high, and the inside pages measure 9.5 inches across by 7.5 inches wide. So I've punched the holes on the side, and now I'm ready to punch the holes in my spine. So with the other album, we were punching through a piece of fabric and then attaching the fabric directly inside the covers. In this case, I'm going to punch right on the cover, so it's going to go right through the fabric. And I've got my holes pre-measured where I need to punch, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. There are the holes, and I can see them a little bit on the outside. I might need to just re-punch those a bit. Okay, so there's the holes through my spine. I don't know if you can see that. So now I'm ready to attach my pages. For this one, I'm using embroidery thread because I want it to be thin enough that I can feed my beads through it. And I think I'll just use this thread. Yeah, like that. So I'm going to thread my needle through here, and also I'm going to get my beads ready for the outside. Because I'm going to be working with beads, it's easier if I cut my thread before I start working. I take my first page, or my first signature, make sure it's facing the proper direction, and it's going to go in the first row of holes on my album, on my journal. So I start by putting the needle from the inside out, and then I put it through my cover, like that. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to use a clamp to hold the thread so that it doesn't go through. Like that. Okay, so now I'm going to start feeding my beads through my needle. And I've already decided what order I wanted them in. And also, I measured to see how many beads I would need from one hole to the next. So then I'm going to put my needle through the cover again. Then down the bottom. And then I'm going to feed some more beads through. I'm following a pattern here, but you can just stagger your beads however you want. Just make sure if you do follow a pattern that you've got enough beads before you start doing this. Like that. And then this will come back through the hole. So now I can adjust the thread. Actually, I didn't need that much floss. So my first page is attached, or my first signature is attached. Keep attaching the other signatures the same way. So I finished stitching my pages, my signatures in the journal, and there's my beads. I think came out quite nice. I like the way they look. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift these beads up and these beads down, and this is where I'm going to have my ribbon. So I'm just taking a little piece of this embroidery floss and I'm just going to tie it around the middle. Like that, and then I run this underneath this series of beads here. And then back up here, and I'm going to tie this into a knot. And then these little ends I'm going to use to tie the ribbon and my little button on top, like that. And I'm also going to put some glue. I think what I want to do with my ribbon ties, my seam binding, is I'll just stitch the middle. So I'm just using regular thread and run a few stitches here. So this is going to tie like that. And there's my little embroidery floss up at the top. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue here to hold the ribbon in place. Using my hot glue gun. Let that cool a bit. And I'll just tie this into a knot. And then I'm going to cover this with an embellishment. I found this button, and I think what I'm going to do is I just ran my little threads through 2 holes in the button, and I'm going to tie this into a knot. And I'll just leave the ends like that. Or maybe I'll just trim them a little bit. And because this is embroidery floss, I can just undo the strands like that. And just leave that like that. Now, also, I might put a little bit of glue under here, just to make sure it stays in place. And let that cool. And then I can tie my ribbon into a bow, either on the side or on the front cover, like that. So now I'm going to finish embellishing the inside pages with my tabs, and I'm going to add some charms in there, and then I'll show you the finished product. So my journal is constructed. I still have to put the charms inside, and I'm going to do that later, but I wanted to get this final video done before the lighting in my room gets really bad as the sun comes down. I don't have any natural light in here, and when it gets dark out, the lighting gets really horrible, worse than normal. So I'm just going to show you very quickly. I added the trim to my edges here on the front and on the back. And here's the inside. So I've put my tabs in, and I've got some ribbon tabs in there, and like I said, I still have to attach my charms, but I'm going to do that after. I'm going to do a more detailed video on these 2 journals because I will be putting them in my Etsy shop. So I'll go through the albums in more detail, but I just wanted to get this done because it's the weekend and I wanted to get this tutorial up as soon as possible. So that's it for the Beaded Spine journal. If you make some, I'd really like to see pictures of how yours turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial and that you get around to making your own beaded spine journals. Have a nice day. Bye.